Imagine walking into a cluttered apartment in the heart of Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, expecting maybe some dusty books or forgotten relics from history. Instead, you find 29 life-size dolls scattered around, dressed in frilly clothes, their faces painted with eerie makeup. But as you look closer, a chill runs down your spine. These aren't dolls at all. They're the mummified remains of young girls, preserved and posed like cherished toys. This isn't some horror movie plot. It's the real-life nightmare that unfolded in 2011 when authorities arrested Anatoly Moskvin, a brilliant historian whose secret hobby shocked the world. What drove a man of such intellect to desecrate graves and turn the dead into companions? That's the haunting question we'll unravel today. The case of Anatoly Moskvin burst into the headlines like a dark secret finally exposed. Born in 1966 in Soviet Russia, Moskvin grew up to become a respected linguist and expert on Celtic folklore, speaking 13 languages and amassing a library of over 60,000 books. He lived quietly with his elderly parents in a modest flat, contributing articles to local papers and wandering cemeteries as part of his self-proclaimed role as a necropolist, someone who studies burial grounds. But beneath this facade of scholarly pursuit lay something far more sinister. In November 2011, police raided his home after catching him vandalizing Muslim graves, only to discover the mummified bodies of girls aged 3 to 12, exhumed from local cemeteries over nearly a decade. Dressed in stockings, boots, and makeup, some even had music boxes sewn into their chests to sing when touched. Moskvin claimed he was saving them from lonely graves, treating them like daughters he never had. Why does this matter? It forces us to confront the thin line between genius and madness, and the lasting pain inflicted on grieving families who thought their children were at peace. At the core of this mystery is how a man like Moskvin, who seemed so ordinary on the surface, could harbor such a twisted compulsion without anyone noticing. For years, graves in the Nizhny Novgorod region were disturbed, headstones toppled, earth freshly turned, but investigations led nowhere. Police initially suspected extremist groups, beefing up patrols and forming special teams to hunt for vandals. Yet the desecrations continued, leaving families heartbroken and authorities baffled. What unresolved tension simmered here? Moskvin wasn't a violent killer. He didn't harm the living. Instead, he robbed the dead of their rest, mummifying them with salt and soda, wrapping their faces in fabric to hide decay. The injustice lies in the violation of sacred ground and the stolen peace of parents who visited empty tombs, unaware their daughters' remains were propped up in a stranger's bedroom. This wasn't just grave robbing. It was a delusion that blurred life and death, raising questions about mental health in a society that often overlooks it. How could someone so educated descend into this? The answers hide in his past, but piecing them together reveals a puzzle that's as disturbing as it is tragic. Let's dive into the twisted backstory that might explain Moskvin's motives. From a young age, he faced traumas that scarred his psyche deeply. As a third grader, he came home bruised and withdrawn after being assaulted by a stranger, a secret he may have kept buried, leading to aggressive outbursts when questioned by his parents. They noticed something off but chose to give him space, even taking him on walks through graveyards, which some later blamed for sparking his fixation. Academically gifted, he topped his classes, but bullying isolated him socially. He poured his energy into books, teaching himself languages and devouring knowledge on the occult. Then came the turning point at age 12, on March 4, 1979. While walking home from school, a group of men in black suits dragged him to the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova, who had died from electrocution. They forced him to kiss her corpse 3 times on the forehead, placed a wedding ring on his finger linking him to the dead girl, and gave him fruit and money before swearing him to silence for 40 days. Moskvin later described this as igniting his belief in magic and an irresistible pull toward cemeteries. Whether fully true or exaggerated by his mind, it planted seeds of obsession. He threw the fruit away but bought a book on animals with the money, calling the marriage useful for his fascination with the dead. This childhood ritual, blending grief and coercion, twisted his view of death into something intimate and possessive. As Moskvin grew older, Early red flags in his behavior hinted at deeper contradictions. He excelled at Moscow State University, becoming known in academic circles for his expertise in Celtic history and death rituals. He traveled widely, taught college courses, and built a massive collection of documents and artifacts. But socially, he remained a recluse, never marrying or dating, abstaining from alcohol and claiming lifelong virginity. His parents sensed his oddities but dismissed them, used to his eccentric ways. Reports of him sleeping in cemeteries during research trips, up to 20 miles a day on foot, drinking from puddles, even napping in coffins, raised eyebrows among colleagues, yet no one intervened. Police questioned him multiple times for suspected vandalism during his cemetery surveys, but his credentials always cleared him. Between 2005 and 2007, commissioned to catalog over 700 graveyards, he claimed unparalleled knowledge of the region's dead. He published articles on his great walks around cemeteries, sharing discoveries that blended history with eerie personal insights. These pursuits masked a growing isolation, where the dead became his only companions. Contradictions piled up, a scholar revered for intellect, yet haunted by loneliness that pushed him toward the macabre. Investigations later revealed he began exhuming bodies around 2002, but early signs, like anonymous notes left on graves, congratulating the deceased on holidays, went unnoticed as mere pranks. But one piece of evidence from his early life didn't make sense. How did that forced kiss at Natasha's funeral evolve into a decade-long secret? If it was just a traumatic spark, why did it take so long to ignite into action? Something else must have triggered the shift from fascination to felony. Focusing on Moskvin as the suspicious individual, his timeline shows inconsistencies that unravel his seemingly stable life. In 2003, at age 37, he met Yulia Granova, a spiritual young woman who shared his interests. They formed a platonic bond, satisfying his need for connection without breaking his celibacy vows. Yulia wanted a child, and Moskvin, longing for a daughter, agreed to adopt. They applied for a young girl, but authorities rejected them due to his erratic income from freelance journalism. This blow strained his family. He threatened his mother with black magic if she opposed him, but she shrugged it off. The relationship with Yulia fizzled soon after, leaving him more isolated. Just months later, on May 9, 2003, he dug up his first body, a girl in poor condition, hollowing out her coffin and mummifying her with scavenged materials. He claimed the dead called to him, asking for walks. His alibi of academic research covered frequent cemetery visits, but the timing aligns suspiciously with personal failures. No one connected the dots as graves were disturbed, including that of 10-year-old Olga Shardova, murdered brutally and exhumed shortly after burial. Moskvin's notes on graves, posing as a historian, hid his true intent. These flaws in his story, flawed alibis of solitude, inconsistent behaviors, paint a picture of a man whose genius couldn't hide his unraveling mind. Remember that lingering question from Anatoly Moskvin's childhood, the forced kiss at Natasha Petrova's funeral, and why it took decades to spark his grave-robbing spree? It turns out the real catalyst wasn't just that eerie ritual. It was a heartbreaking personal failure in 2003 that shattered his fragile world. After his adoption application with Yulia Granova fell through due to his unstable finances, and their platonic relationship dissolved, Moskvin spiraled into profound loneliness. He later confessed that the rejection ignited his desperation for a family, pushing him to rescue the dead as substitutes. This new insight from his police interviews reveals how suppressed trauma collided with adult disappointment, transforming fascination into felony. No longer content with cemetery walks, he began exhuming bodies that very year, claiming the girl's spirits begged for company. It's a tragic twist that humanizes his madness without excusing it, showing how unaddressed pain can fester into something unimaginable. As the case deepened, police missteps emerged that prolonged the mystery and amplified the family's suffering. For nearly 2 years starting in 2009, graves were desecrated across Nizhny Novgorod, earth upturned, headstones defaced, but investigators chased false leads, convinced extremist groups were behind it. They ramped up patrols and assembled elite teams specializing in hate crimes, yet overlooked the quiet historian who roamed cemeteries under the guise of research. Legal loopholes played a role too. Russian law at the time treated grave desecration as a misdemeanor with light penalties, allowing Moskvin's activities to go unchecked despite occasional police stops where his academic credentials waved him through. Public misinformation swirled as well. Rumors of satanic cults distracted from the truth, while families like Natalia Shardova's endured anonymous notes on their daughters' graves, signed by a kind angel, which police dismissed as pranks. These errors not only delayed justice but deepened the wound for parents who visited empty plots, unaware their children's remains were hidden in a nearby apartment. It's a stark reminder of how systemic blind spots can let darkness thrive in plain sight. Diving deeper into Moskvin's psychological profile uncovers a disturbing pattern of obsession rooted in isolation and delusion. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia after his arrest, he exhibited traits like auditory hallucinations, believing the dead girls whispered pleas to be taken home. His hidden relationship with the corpses went beyond mummification. He sang lullabies, hosted tea parties, and inserted music boxes into their chests so they could respond to his touch. This wasn't random. He selected graves meticulously, lying on them to communicate before digging, favoring girls who died young and tragically, much like the murdered Olga Shardova. Patterns in his behavior trace back to childhood traumas, including that unreported assault and the funeral coercion, which experts say warped his boundaries between life and death. He hoarded over 60,000 books on the occult and folklore, blending Celtic rituals with his fantasies of resurrection through black magic or future cloning. Yet, empathy creeps in. He loathed sex, viewed it as disgusting, and treated the bodies with a twisted tenderness, never dismembering them. This profile paints a man trapped in a fantasy world, where loneliness birthed a horrifying coping mechanism that stole peace from the living. But one detail remained unexplained. How did Moskvin's elderly parents, sharing that cramped apartment, truly miss the signs of 29 mummified bodies in their home? If they noticed the rancid smell or his late-night whispers, why the silence? Something about their denial doesn't quite add up. Witness testimony finally shed light on the eerie reality inside Moskvin's world, painting a picture more chilling than any fiction. Neighbors recalled a foul odor seeping from the flat, chalking it up to building rot, while a family friend described visiting and admiring the puppets as art, never suspecting human remains lurked beneath the fabric masks and stuffed rags. His mother, Elvira, testified in shock, admitting she scolded him for talking to the dolls like a child, but assumed it was harmless eccentricity. "Are you still playing with them?" she'd ask, oblivious to the truth. Police officers who raided the apartment in 2011 shared harrowing accounts, finding bodies posed at the dinner table. One named Masha even introduced to relatives on New Year's Eve. Surveillance from cemetery cameras, though limited back then, captured shadowy figures matching Moskvin's build near disturbed graves, but DNA twists were absent since he didn't harm the living. Traces of salt and soda on the mummies linked directly to his preservation methods. Victims' families provided gut-wrenching statements, like Natalia Shardova detailing 9 years of torment from those holiday notes, realizing too late they came from the man who stole her daughter's body. These voices humanize the horror, revealing how his delusions rippled outward, leaving scars that time can't heal. Media frenzy and public pressure twisted the narrative from the start, shaping a monster out of a man while burying the nuances of mental illness. Russian outlets sensationalized him as the grave robber psycho, fueling outrage that demanded harsh punishment, yet ignored calls for better psychiatric support in a country where such issues are often stigmatized. International coverage, like BBC reports, highlighted the bizarre details. Music boxes in ribcages, wedding rings from his childhood ritual echoed in his actions, turning the story into a global spectacle. Public petitions from families urged lifetime confinement, influencing court decisions to extend his treatment repeatedly, even as doctors in 2018 briefly sought outpatient release, only to withdraw amid backlash. By 2021, another bid for freedom failed under media scrutiny, and just this year in 2025, a court ruled to prolong his detention until November, citing ongoing risks despite improvements. This pressure ensured justice for the victims but raised questions about rehabilitation versus retribution. In the end, the story became a cautionary tale, amplified by podcasts and documentaries that keep the shadows lingering long after the arrest. Remember that nagging doubt about Anatoly Moskvin's parents. How could they share a tiny, cluttered apartment with 29 mummified girls and claim total ignorance? It turns out their denial wasn't just convenient. It was a heartbreaking mix of willful blindness and deep-seated fear. In court testimonies and interviews, his mother Elvira admitted noticing the dolls but dismissed them as an extension of his Russian doll collection, a harmless quirk from her brilliant but odd son. The rancid smell? She blamed the building's decay. His father Yuri suffered a heart attack post-arrest, and both were hospitalized from shock, later living in isolation as neighbors shunned them. Experts suggest they sensed something wrong but buried it, terrified of confronting their only child's unraveling mind. This revelation flips the script. It wasn't outright complicity, but a tragic failure to act, echoing how families often overlook red flags in mental health crises. Did it change everything? Absolutely, showing how Moskvin's delusions ensnared not just strangers, but his own blood, leaving everyone scarred. The aftermath of Anatoly Moskvin's case unfolded like a slow-burning nightmare, where trial outcomes leaned toward containment rather than true closure, leaving families grappling with unresolved pain. In May 2012, Moskvin confessed to 44 counts of grave desecration, recounting his methods with unsettling precision. Mixing salt and soda to preserve fragile remains, stuffing rags to restore their forms, and drilling holes beneath their eyes so they could watch cartoons with him. A psychiatric evaluation delivered the decisive blow. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he was deemed unfit for trial, spared prison, and sent to a Nizhny Novgorod clinic for indefinite treatment. Court reviews in February 2013, April 2014, July 2015, and beyond. Most recently, in November 2025, extended his stay, each citing persistent delusions too dangerous for release. He spoke openly, claiming the girls were his daughters, saved from lonely graves for future cloning, driven not by malice but by a desperate loneliness that twisted his reality. The consequences cut deep. Families like Natalia Shardova's demanded life imprisonment or harsher punishment, their anguish raw as they faced empty graves robbed of sanctity. One father, haunted by guilt, refused compensation, admitting Moskvin's eerie care. Dressing his daughter in frilly clothes, reading her stories, surpassed his own during her life. This confession stunned the courtroom, revealing the complex grief that Moskvin's actions unearthed. His parents, Yuri and Elvira, faced relentless ostracism. Neighbors turned away, and the couple, shattered by their son's crimes, contemplated ending their lives, with Yuri's heart attack and Elvira's frail health underscoring their despair. Yet they insisted they saw only dolls, not bodies, a claim that strained belief given the cramped apartment's rancid air. Moskvin cooperated fully, naming each girl and her tragic story, from Olga Shardova's brutal murder to others lost to accidents or illness, as if knowing them absolved his theft. Still, justice felt hollow. No full trial left accountability dangling, as Russia's legal system treated his madness as a shield, sidestepping punishment for treatment. Families felt cheated, their voices drowned in a society quick to lock away the problem but slow to address its roots: mental health stigma and overlooked trauma. The lack of closure fueled their rage, with some, like Natalia, advocating for reform, haunted daily by the clinic visible from her window, a reminder of her stolen child. Then came the final unexpected twist, buried in overlooked clues from the apartment raid: a dried human heart tucked inside one mummified girl, not hers but possibly from another exhumed body, hinting at rituals darker than admitted. Police reports glossed over it, focusing on the dolls, but forensic whispers suggest Moskvin's occult experiments went beyond play. He may have harvested parts for magic to bind spirits, aligning with his Celtic folklore obsession. This hidden motivation reshapes everything. Was it pure loneliness, or a quest for immortality through forbidden rites? Coupled with his 2016 plan to marry a 25-year-old admirer who attended hearings, it paints a man still dreaming of normalcy from his cell, even as courts in 2025 extended his stay until November, deeming him improved but unsafe. Peering into Anatoly Moskvin's personal life reveals a jarring contrast to his intellectual wealth: a man of vast knowledge living a threadbare existence, scraping by on sporadic freelance journalism paychecks. He had no savings, no property, only a 60,000-book library, a treasure trove of occult texts and folklore now likely seized by authorities. Choosing an ascetic life, he shunned alcohol, smoking, and intimacy, funneling his meager earnings into tomes on Celtic rituals and late-night cemetery treks across Nizhny Novgorod. His deepening isolation, a psychological toll from childhood trauma and social rejection, fueled a delusion where the dead became his only companions, birthing a horror that shocked the world. Families like Natalia Shardova's bore a heavier burden. Her daughter Olga, stolen from her grave, left Natalia frozen in grief, staring at the psychiatric clinic from her kitchen window where Moskvin remains confined. Unable to reclaim normalcy, she channels her pain into advocating for mental health reform, highlighting Russia's stigma and systemic gaps that let warning signs slip through. Her story, like others, underscores the ripple effects of his actions, grief that lingers like an open wound. Key takeaways? Untreated trauma festers into tragedy, and society's blind spots allow monsters to hide in scholars' skins. Empathy and early intervention could prevent such darkness from taking root. If Moskvin's tale of twisted tenderness has you pondering where genius ends and madness begins, stick around. Our next dive uncovers a killer who scripted his crimes like a novel, leaving clues only the sharpest eyes catch. What shadows lurk in your own backyard? Hit play and find out. As we wrap this, picture those empty graves, the silenced music boxes. It's a reminder that some wounds never heal, forcing us to question. Was he a monster, a victim, or both? The dead hold their secrets, but the living must face the truth.